Now that we've added our vCenter server to Active Directory, we have the ability to create sets of permissions for those users within our vCenter inventory. So lesson 5 is all about the who, what, and where of permissions in vCenter server. We're going to define what it means to create a permission in vCenter and look at some of those rules for applying permissions. Applying permissions in vCenter is a little bit different than what folks might be used to if you're Active Directory administrators. So we'll look at some of those differences there, okay? Once we understand the rules for applying permissions, we'll have a look at custom roles and then use that to create some permissions in the lab. So a permission in the context of vCenter requires 3 different things. It requires a role, it requires a user, and it requires a vSphere object. Okay? Think of it as the who, what, and where of permissions within vCenter. Now, relative to that, there are a few definitions, a few things that we should actually define before we move on. The first thing is a privilege. So what's a privilege? A privilege is very simply an action that can be performed within vSphere. A powering on a virtual machine, that is a privilege. Creating a virtual network, that is a privilege. Writing to a data store, that is a privilege. Opening a virtual machine console, that is a privilege. All of these little actions, they're all privileges. And when it comes to actually getting something done, say for example, creating a virtual machine. Well, creating a virtual machine requires lots of different privileges. So as we combine privileges together, we can create a role. That is, I want to actually define something I can do, like create a virtual machine. Well, I need to be able to open a console to a VM. I need to be able to attach a virtual NIC to a network. I need to be able to write to a data store. I need to be able to edit the settings of a virtual machine. I need to be able to power on that virtual machine on a particular host or set of hosts, and so on, right? So that virtual machine creator might be a role that is a combination of privileges. Now, when it comes to the vCenter object, I need to know where I have the ability to create a virtual machine. That is, can I create a virtual machine on a cluster? Can I create a virtual machine on a particular ESXi host, but not another particular ESXi host? Can I take that virtual machine and attach it to a network, but not another network? Or write files to one data store, but not another data store? So now that we've taken the role, we have to define the object on which the role can apply. And then finally, we have to say, who does the permission get added to, right? So now we need a user as well. So a user can be an individual user, or it can be a group of users, okay? So all 3 of these things, the role, the vSphere object, and the user or group, needs to come together to create a permission. So the roles are privileges that take a group of privileges and combine them together, okay? Now, if you go into administration in vCenter server, you're going to see access control. And that's where you have a list of roles. Now, there are a number of roles that have been pre-created in the system. And if you click on a particular role, you will see the privileges there that make up that role. You can also see on what inventory objects that role has been added to a permission. Okay? So for administrator, you might expect that all of the privileges are available. Okay? If it's no access, that's another role, you might expect that none of the privileges are in that particular role. So the roles are there to allow users to perform certain tasks. Okay? Now there are a few of these roles that are system roles that you can't modify, but you can always take a particular role and you can clone it. You can then edit that cloned role. You can add and create a brand new role for yourself. Once you've got the role, it's time to create a permission. So I'll go into the vCenter inventory and choose an object on which I want to create that permission. Now, all objects will have a permissions tab. In this case, I'm looking at a cluster, and there's my permissions tab where I see all of the permissions on this particular cluster. We'll also see where that permission happened to have been created. For example, this permission for user vSphere.local administrator has the role administrator, and it was defined on the vCenter object itself. Now, when you create a permission, you have the option to propagate that permission down the object hierarchy, or you can have it just apply on the particular object itself. So in this case, I have a permission on the vCenter server, and vSphere.local administrator now actually has the role administrator assigned here, and they must have hit that box that says propagate to children because we know it applies also to the cluster down here. Now here you have this thing that says global permission. And I want you to think of a global permission as one level higher than vCenter itself. So if you have global permissions defined, and we're going to show a slide on global permissions, think of that global permission as applying to not only a vCenter and its inventory, but to all vCenters that are set up in enhanced linked mode as well. So now I'm ready to add this permission, right? I'll select the particular inventory object, I'll go to the permissions tab, and I'll hit the plus button, where I will select the user or group of users and the role. And there's the option to propagate it down to child objects if I want. Once I go back to administration and then roles, I finally get to see usage here, where I can see all of the different places where the administrator role has been established. I can see where it's defined and what user or group gets that permission and whether or not we've set it up to propagate down to child objects. Now, when we come back, we're going to finish this lesson by looking at some of the rules that apply in vSphere in particular relative to permissions. We'll look at how we create a new permission, as well as what global permissions are all about. So we'll be right back.